Hi, my name is Cindy Larrabee, and the book that I will be reviewing today is The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells. This book was published on February 19th, 2019 by the Crown Publishing Group. As easily given away by the title, this book dives deeper into the ever-growing issue of global warming and how it does not only just affect Earth itself, but how it also affects human life. As just said, this book revolves around the issue of global warming, and the way that this is done throughout the book is by breaking it into three main sections. The first section, which Wells likes to call Cascades, just overall introduces what global warming is in ways that it is taking place around us, and also starting to hint at where it will go if nothing is done about it. In the beginning of this section, he states, "It is worse, much worse than you think." This statement is something I will be coming back to on multiple occasions throughout this review. The second section is called Elements of Chaos, which includes 12 chapters that each discuss a different way that global warming is taking place and how it is specifically affecting the Earth. Some of the topics discussed, but are not just limited to, are sea level rise, wildfires, natural disasters, and air pollution. Just like with Cascades, each of these chapters begins by explaining what the overall issue is, and then we'll go into explaining how, if nothing is done about these issues, how it will get much worse. The third and final section is called the Climate Kaleidoscope. Rather than focusing on how global warming affects the Earth, this focuses on how global warming will affect human life if it continues to get worse. This also discusses how things such as politics, technology, culture, and so many other more will change if global warming continues. To begin my analysis, I will first be discussing what the main objective of the book was. As I have been saying throughout this review so far, the main objective of the book is to bring forward the topic of global warming as well as discussing how it is indeed getting much worse than what we may think. This book also makes sure to dive deep into the topic and make sure that we are facing the cold, hard facts that are indeed happening around us. Some of the facts that are stated throughout this book can be considered scary, and in all honesty, that is a reality that we need to face on the topic. Following that, I would say that David Wallace Wells was indeed incredibly successful with getting the main objective across. What made it so successful were the sources that he used throughout the book. Each of the sources were written by groups such as IPCC or NASA, or were even written by researchers who have been studying global warming for years. I, as an audience member, knew that the information being shared could be seen as reliable because of the sources they came from. There are also other methods used to make this book so successful. In my opinion, one of the methods used was indeed breaking the book down into multiple sections. By doing this, this allowed each of the topics being discussed to have their own little spotlight and to be the main focus for the time being. To continue from that, breaking the book up into multiple sections also makes it easier to find information. Let's just say you are doing an assignment on global warming and you specifically want a fact about air pollution. You would then just go to that chapter in the book, and just inside that one little particular section, you could find anything that you need to find out. The last method used to make this book so successful was the fourth section I did not mention previously. This section simply includes an index, as well as all the sources throughout the book cited. Let's just say if there is a particular keyword that you were looking for, you would then go to the index, where it would then direct you to the exact page number it is on. If there was a certain source that you were more interested in, since of course it was not given its entirety inside the book, you would then also go into that section, find what you were looking for, and then eventually it will direct you to where you will need to go to read it. Even though this book worked well for the most part, of course there were also methods that did not work out so well. Now, before I necessarily dive into what those methods were, I am here to admit that, of course, I am not an expert on global warming, nor will I ever be. If I'm being 100% honest, I would even say that I only know enough information to get me by, such as knowing what global warming is, in ways that it is happening around us, and of course where it could potentially lead us if it continues. Now here's why I thought to not work out so well. There is definitely more than a few times throughout reading where I became very confused on what I had just read, just because of one, I did not have the prior knowledge about that said fact, and two, it was never properly broken down to make it more understandable. Here's an example that I faced. In the last section of the book, there's a chapter about global warming and technology. Personally, I don't really know a lot of information about those two, so I was kind of excited to figure out what exactly this meant, but in the end, I ended up not even learning anything. I was very confused by a lot of the words that were being thrown at me because I did not know what they meant and or why they even had relevancy to this particular topic. It also seemed to just suddenly shift from talking about technology, and then it just kind of went into artificial intelligence with really no explanation until why it all of a sudden took that course and or why, once again, it was relevant. It was never thoroughly explained, and I just sat there very confused on what exactly I was supposed to be learning. Now I will be discussing the intended audience. Personally, I would say this book could definitely work for anyone who just wants to learn about global warming in general, but however, due to my own personal experiences with this book, I would say that this book should only be for those who have more knowledge on the topic rather than what you would just learn in, let's say, like a science class or some sort of article. You should have quite a bit of knowledge beforehand in order to properly understand the facts that are being told to you. Now, of course, this does not mean you will not learn anything, because I still did, even though I struggled to, which I will get into in just a little bit, but also maybe just to properly understand what was being shared with you, you should at least already have some sort of knowledge on the topic. My stance on global warming before reading this book was that, of course, it is happening, and if nothing is done about it, it will continue to get worse. While reading this book, that stance remained, but I would even go as far as saying is that it even grew more. The information that Wells was sharing was very eye-opening and was, in a way, a reality check. It really kind of made you stop and think that, yes, this is happening on our planet, and that if nothing is done about it soon, such as the actual actions to make sure it is being done, or just simply discussing and educating others, it will get worse. The last part of my analysis is whether or not I recommend this book. Personally, I would say both yes and no. Yes, because it might be a little bit hard, but you will actually learn something new, but also with the way that the formatting and as well as all the research that went into it, that definitely makes it a little bit better. However, I would say no, simply just because you should not pick up this book if you do not already have some sort of prior knowledge to global warming. This book is not here to explain it to you. It expects you to already know it, so therefore, when it dives deeper down into it, you can know what it means. Earlier in this review, I mentioned how Wells stated that global warming is actually much worse than what we think it is. Even though I definitely had a hard time picking up on some of the information inside this book, here are some pieces that I did pick up on that actually helps support that statement. One new piece of information that I learned comes from the chapter on air pollution. In that, Wells writes on page 100, with CO2 at 930 parts per million, more than double where we are today, cognitive ability declines by 21%. In short, what he means when he writes is that with CO2 now in the air more often because of global warming, we will therefore breathe it in, and because of that, it will just make us not function as well as we normally do. And that this will, of course, will continue because global warming is continuing to get worse. To add on to that, on page 104, he writes, globally, 1 out of 6 deaths is caused by air pollution. Personally, I definitely did not expect that to be the number. I was thinking maybe be like 1 out of 100. I was not expecting that to be all the way down in the single digits, and that is very scary when you actually think about 1 in 6 people. Another new thing I learned comes from the chapter on natural disasters. In that, on page 82, Wells writes, by 2070, Asian megacities could lose as much as $35 trillion in assets due to storms, up from just $3 trillion in 2005. Of course, I know that natural disasters cause a lot of damage, but I have never really considered the actual money that goes into like rebuilding and so forth. To see $3 trillion is already kind of mind-blowing, but to see it jump up from just $3 trillion to $35 trillion in only 65 years is just insane. That's absolutely insane to think that that's how much it will go up if these storms continue to get worse, and for the most part, they will. Finally, one last piece of information that I learned was in the chapter of sea level rising. In that, Wells is explaining how there are 2 West Antarctic sheets, and that since they are melting, is that when they completely melt, it could raise sea level by 200 feet. The book doesn't necessarily go into exactly how big these ice sheets are, how much is left, just how big they were in general, and so on. So it's kind of hard to necessarily imagine that, but to think that these most likely huge ice sheets are melting and that it could raise the sea level by 200 feet is once again also completely mind-blowing. because I've always heard that yes, sea levels is rising because of these melting ice sheets, but sometimes they may only say like 8 feet, which yes is still pretty serious and a lot, but 8 feet compared to 200 feet is like nothing. So yeah, that fact was extremely eye-opening and just kind of really makes you kind of face it of this is happening right in front of us, and that if we're not doing anything, this 200 feet could easily spike up to something even higher. In conclusion, this book goes further than simply informing the audience on global warming as a whole, but how both our planet and human life is expected to suffer from it. The book successfully brought the issue forward by having multiple reliable sources to support the statements being made. Anyone who is interested in this topic can read this book, but it is not recommended if there isn't any sort of prior knowledge to the subject beforehand. It is a well-informed book that if you simply just want to learn something new, learn something even more about global warming that you may already know, this is definitely a book that you should pick up.